Unit 6, Lesson 4, The Korean War. Unit 6, Lesson 4, Vocabulary. We've talked before about containment and the U.S. containment policy in Europe. Now we're going to focus on the containment policy in Asia. America believed its containment policy had stopped the spread of communism throughout Europe. But now China, the world's most populous nation, had adopted communism. The US and its allies join the fights in Asia, both in Korea and in Vietnam, to keep communism from spreading globally. United States containment policy in Asia is governed by something called the domino theory. The domino theory equals the spread of communism, where as one country becomes communist, the thought is that other countries will soon follow. Since the 1920s, Chinese communists had sought to overthrow the nationalist government in China. Jiang Zeshi on the bottom left and Mao Zedong on the bottom right cooperated during World War II to defeat the Axis powers, to defeat Nazi Germany and the Japanese. They were helped by the Soviets after 1945 to rid China of Axis powers. Led by Mao Zedong, Chinese communists finally defeated the Chinese nationalists in 1949. During this time, President Truman was preoccupied with the communist threat and the growing threat in Europe. But the events in Asia would soon bring charges from Republicans that the Democratic administration was letting the communists win. And after losing China, the United States sought to shore up friendly regimes within Southeast Asia, friendly democratic governments. This leads us to the Korean War and the Vietnam War, individual conflicts as part of the larger Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. In Asia, the policy of containment became the basis for involvement in the Korean and Vietnam Wars. In 1950, Communist North Korea invaded South Korea, starting the Korean War. President Truman came to the aid of South Korea and sent U.S. forces into the conflict. The confrontation between capitalist and communist blocs turned into open military struggle. This was the beginning of the era of proxy wars, where the United States would fight communism in Soviet-backed countries without directly fighting the Soviet Union. If we remember, during World War II, Japan controlled the peninsula nation of Korea. And after Japan's defeat in World War II, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel between Soviet-ruled Northern Korea and democratically ruled South Korea. The Soviet Union supported the communist government in North Korea. It was controlled by the communist Kim Il-sung. Stalin had agreed to the Northern Korean attack on South Korea, but he promised only supplies and not individual manpower or soldiers. Stalin would eventually send pilots dressed in Chinese uniforms and using Chinese phrases over the radio to help the North Korean attack. The United States, on the other hand, supported the non-communist government in South Korea, ruled by the dictatorship of Syngman Rhee. It would use enough force to deter aggression, but without provoking a larger war with the Soviet Union or China directly. The United States did not actually declare war in Korea. And the United Nations sanctioned aid to South Korea as a police action to help rid South Korea of the North Korean invaders. Tensions between North and South Korea exploded when North Korea invaded South Korea. That happened on June 25th, 1950. The United Nations or UN Security Council declared North Korea the aggressor and sent troops from 15 nations to restore peace under the command of World War II hero General Douglas MacArthur. The US contributed 350,000 soldiers to the effort. South Koreans contributed 400,000, and other UN members contributed 50,000. This move by the United Nations succeeded only because the Soviet delegate, who had veto power at the United Nations, was absent because he was protesting the United Nations' refusal to recognize the communist government in China as the official government. So the United Nations sends this international force of soldiers from 15 different countries to Korea in order to push North Koreans out of South Korea, back across the 38th parallel. Pictured here are United Nations forces fighting to recapture Seoul, South Korea, the capital of South Korea, from communist invaders in September of 1950. Korean War energized America's anti-communist commitments. No longer did elected officials hesitate about the need to contain Soviet communism at any cost, to stop that domino effect of one communist country falling and others following it. NATO forces were rapidly expanding. So by 1952, there were 261,000 American troops stationed in Europe, 3 times the number in 1950. And by 1953, NATO forces had reached 7 million. President Truman also increased assistance to the French in Indochina, creating the Military Assistance Advisory Group for Indochina. This was the start of America's deepening involvement in Vietnam and a precursor to the Vietnam War. During his time helping fight back North Korean aggression in South Korea, General MacArthur wanted to blockade China and use Taiwanese nationalists to invade mainland China. He actually ordered China to make peace or be attacked. So President Truman was forced to remove General MacArthur from all his commands and replace him with General Matthew Ridgway, who gradually pushed back almost to the original line, averting a complete war between the United States and China, which would have forced the Soviet Union to back up their Chinese communist allies and would have led, possibly, to World War III in Southeast Asia. The end of the Korean War dragged on for years. Truce talks between the two sides, between the North Communist leaders and the South Korean leaders, lasted for over 2 years, with the official truce signing on July 27, 1953. The two sides never actually agreed to peace, only into a truce to end the active conflict. Pictured before you on the screen are some of the Korean War casualties from the United States and South Korea overall, as well as North Koreans. To this day, the Demilitarized Zone is a 2.5-mile wide stretch of land around the 38th parallel separating North Korea and South Korea, because the official peace talks have never taken place, and a peace treaty was never signed, merely a truce to end the active engagement. The two sides officially are still at war to this day.